And we're live with Jeff, who's represented by Bluehead. New person, Amanda. And Shalina, who is a sort of a threshold graphic kind of special effect. And we're going to go through this episode, mirror image. And better go on to the next slide, and I'll do the Rod Serling voice. And usually mess this up. Right. Right there. Millicent Barnes, age 25, young woman waiting for a bus on a rainy November night. Not a very imaginative type is Miss Barnes, not given to undue anxiety or fears, or for that matter, even the most temporal flights of fancy. Like most young career women, she has a generic classification as a, quote, girl with a head on her shoulders, end quote. All of which is mentioned now because in just a moment, the head on Miss Barnes's shoulders will be put to a test. Circumstances will assault her sense of reality, and a chain of nightmares will put her sanity on a block. Millicent Barnes, who in 1 minute will wonder if she's going mad. It's very difficult for me to concentrate on that in order to say it without making mistakes and to try to get the Rod Serling rhythms. Right.
Well, I see your political propaganda written on the screen. So.
Well, yes, because, you know, you do hear that, oh, women didn't have jobs in the 1950s, apparently. According to some myths. I don't know how they survived without us when they were unmarried. Right. Millicent suspects the bus station is run by lunatics. Snappishly, the ticket taker tells her that she's repeatedly asked when the bus will arrive, adding that her suitcase has already been checked. In the washroom, the attendant claims she was there only a moment before. Yet she's done none of these things. She realizes that it is not their sanity which is in question when, in the washroom mirror, she spies a duplicate of herself sitting in the waiting room. Rushing out, she finds the room empty. A short time later, Millicent elicits the sympathy of Paul Grinstead, might be an SFJ, an amiable businessman also waiting for the bus. When it arrives, the two of them start to get on, but Millicent flees back into the station when she sees that the other her has already boarded. Concerned, Paul misses the bus to remain with the distraught Millicent, who says she now knows what is occurring. A mirror image of her from a parallel world has somehow slipped into this world and must take her place to survive. Certain she is mentally ill, Paul summons the police, who take Millicent away. But a few minutes later, he has reason to regret his decision, chasing an elusive figure he believes has stolen his case. He sees that the man's mockingly grinning face is his own. Right, and right at the end, I'll show how an optical shot is done. Obscure metaphysical explanation to cover a phenomenon. Reasons dredged out of the shadows to explain away that which cannot be explained. Call it parallel planes or just insanity. Whatever it is, you find it in the Twilight Zone. Whew! Over to you, Jeff.
Well, apparently the other plane of existence, they have the ability to teleport or make themselves invisible for periods of time, or because it doesn't. That part of it doesn't make any sense. Because they see when the bus arrives, and then she's already on the bus.
Yeah.
So she couldn't have just been in the bus station unless she has the ability to teleport. So I don't know. I guess you could say that it's like, rather than it being the other version of her is in this plane of existence, she's getting like a window into the other one or something. Is kind of what you could say, I guess. But I don't know. This episode to me is like both more classic Twilight Zone than some of the ones we've watched, but also at the same time a little bit sillier, I guess. So it's like I sort of respect them, what they were trying to do with it, but at the same time I'm like, we've seen like stuff that maintained a better intensity because they kind of, I don't know, it was less things to poke holes in. I don't know how to put that exactly, but so I have mixed feelings about it, I guess.
Sorry, I just knocked my microphone over.
Yeah. Okay. If you ever have a moment where you think there might be a little bit of noise, if you press Control D, it'll quickly kill the sound. So, Jeff, do you want to continue with your bit, or do you want to switch over to Amanda? I think have you got some more to say?
I figured I'd let somebody else go for a bit.
Okay then, Amanda, you tell, because I've written on here, and I don't know if it's just me because I don't speak for all NTPs. I've put here different planes of existence. The NTPs perk up. Now you're talking. So were you interested, Amanda, when you heard
Say that again?
bit?
I didn't understand what you said.
Different planes of existence.
Right, I understood that part. Then what did you say after that?
I reckon the NTPs would perk up when they hear that, because that's the kind of thing they're
perk
interested in.
I was interested to see someone who was so clearly not. I don't think you can make an argument at all for Millicent being intuitive or NTP. So it was interesting to see her trying to just like find a reliable reason for the things happening to her, because there's such a change from the beginning where she tries to deny, and then she finally finds some feasible explanation, I guess. And that was interesting. I really liked the closing line of this episode, where Serling, he hinted at the parallel planes thing being just another explaining away of the reality of the thing. I liked that, but I mean, Jeff, some of the holes that you're poking, I think, could be countered quite easily, but I agree that I didn't like it as much as some of the other episodes, but I found the parallel planes bit interesting. Really did.
Yeah, I got a bit tired during that bit. Like the first half of it, I was feeling very, very tired, and I don't know how much of it was the plot and how much was just me. But I sort of
Right.
I mean, I enjoyed it. I like little things like, the details of you've got like the suitcase appearing in different places and those kind of aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that, but I sort of think that that whatever you want to call it, the outro, it sort of does seem like explaining away something, because it doesn't really explain what was going on. Not that we have to have it explained, but I don't know. I thought the ending with the grinning double guy running off was just kind of silly. I was like, after sort of establishing this cool kind of intense atmosphere.
I know. I was going to mention, I wish they had closed it off in a better way. I thought there was going to be something else to him realizing that Millicent was not crazy. It was ridiculous. It was so silly. Just, I don't know.
I mean, honestly, I think the thing that pops in my head is like how I probably would have ended it would be like having the bus arrive at the next place and having the two of them on the bus together, like talking about like the weird thing that happened with the other versions of themselves. So it's like establishing that the real versions of them were the ones on the bus.
Yeah.
That would have been better than having the grinning
Spooky
guy running away thing.
Well, I felt like the acting more than anything of that scene was poorly done, because I would have liked a little bit of a connecting the dots moment for him, whereas he just kind of goes after the guy. Like,
yeah, half-heartedly. I'm going to chase him, sort of, and then stop and say, hey, where'd you go? And yeah, it definitely seemed like he didn't have an ending to this one. And just had to come up with something really quickly that wasn't very satisfying.
well.
I thought another way you could have ended it was at the moment he realizes his suitcase isn't there. Instead of seeing the guy running out, he could have gone up to. They could have done the circle thing, had him walk up to the guy at the counter and start the same thing that they did with the woman. So having him say something about like, why's my bag back there? And have the guy say, well, you checked it, just a few minutes ago or whatever, they could, and ended it that way. That would have maintained the same level of, I think, sort of seriousness to it at the same time, as establishing that he was experiencing the same thing.
I like the old codger behind the desk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
good character and good actor playing.
Right.
Yeah. He could have a whole series to himself, that old guy. And also the language of the guy and the language and the slang of the old guy was good.
Okay, I'm gonna risk a spoiler of another old show if I say this, but one thing that I think would be cool, because Quantum Leap did this, where in their final episode they had like sort of a reunion of characters that had been in previous episodes, and I think Twilight Zone could have done that too, and it would have been cool. Like already some of the characters we've seen, there could have been some parallel thing where they're together and meeting each other. That would be kind of funny.
Right.
Maybe that's just me.
So, in terms of typology, I thought that guy there was an SFJ. What do you think, Jeff? Not enough to. I just thought the way he interacted.
Yeah. Well, my view is that in the amount of time that these episodes are, it's hard to establish enough of a character to really make a solid guess on those things, unless they really reveal a lot about themselves and what they say. And he doesn't really, so. In my opinion, you can't really say for sure.
Well, another way of looking at it is interaction style. I mean, it's not like coming in, taking charge.
Well, I would say he doesn't start. He doesn't start spouting anything theoretical. So I guess he does come off as a sensing type in general, and that he does when she starts talking about these theories of alternate universes. He basically says there's probably some more logical explanation kind of in response. So,
Yeah, I mean, part of it is the way it's just like the energy level coming off from because he seems quite concerning, quite genuinely protective of her without actually being that romantically interested in her. He just seems quite gentlemanly and protective. Anyhow, she's back.
I mean, I could see myself possibly doing the same thing, though. And I'm about as far away from a J as you can get. So, like I said, I don't think in those particular actions, I would say about the only thing you can conclude is he's probably not an intuitive type.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really seem not just he doesn't just contradict her theory. He seems not interested in entertaining the idea at all. So.
Right. So, man, did you have anything else to say about this episode before we go over to Shalina?
Nothing particular.
Okay. So, Shalina, what's your 2 cents about this episode?
Okay, so I'm looking at it in a whole different light. When I was watching the episode, I was looking at it from a psychological standpoint, and to me, I was wondering if it was like the episode was a representation of like dissociation, some type of a split personality, or the episode as a whole, the bigger picture. I looked at it from that lens. I didn't really entertain the alternate realities theory that the lady brought up in the thingy. The thing that bothered me about this episode was there was no like, it seemed like there was no point to the whole episode. Like by the end, it's like, okay, like what happened? Like normally in Twilight Zones, I could take away some type of an insight or something from it. But this one, it just kind of left you hanging like, oh, well, we just saw doubles and that was that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I looked at it from a more psychological standpoint where not that was the point of the episode, but that's just the way I looked at it. One thing I have to ask you is, where do you get ENTP from? Why NE? Why NE over NI?
Where did I say ENTP?
When you were talking about the ENTP perk or whatever, the theory about the alternate realities in the beginning before we started.
NTP.
Oh, NTPs love all that kind of stuff.
Why?
Look, she's perking up right now.
And
Look, she's
No.
smiling.
But why not NI when? Never mind. Okay, because we're coming from two different sources, so never mind. It's going to open up a whole nother thing. So I'll leave that alone. I was just wondering, because from my understanding, NE is like more concerned with the immediate concrete world, and then NI is more so about the spiritual, the realities you can't see. So I was thinking, why not NI? More like NI would like be entertaining the alternate realities. I don't know. I was just wondering why immediately you thought, "Ooh, it's the ENTP's perk" and all that stuff.
Well, what I said to NTPs is because NTPs tend to like the Star Trek kind of science fiction with ideas.
yes, it's more about the pop culture side of it and
Right.
the way that it's presented than it is. So if you have an NI dominant, and for yourself, you looked at this episode and you said, "Oh, that parallel universe is," well, and even Jeff, he was like, "Well, it's kind of silly," like that wasn't the focus that he was going for. But I eat that stuff up. I really do.
Right,
Now,
but the INTJs and the INFJs by default, their dominant can go a little. It's focused on transcendentalism and other realities behind the material realm. So I was just wondering why it's more NE than NI. Like I could even see an INTJ before ENTP. I mean, I could see how you guys would find it interesting, but I could see INTJ giving it a little bit more validity as far as.
Well, to give you a sorry, I think I know what you were going to say. As
That's
far
okay.
as,
Go ahead.
So a
You're
real life
ENTP,
example, I'm going to
right?
be very INTP.
Okay.
I'm going to be very short about this, but Elon Musk, tertiary NI user, in my opinion, he's either an ISTP or an INTJ, and he seems a lot more delta to me. But he has this idea of parallel universes that's a little bit mathematically sourced, but for him, the way that he applies it, and I mean that he applies it, and there's the difference. It's like when he's talking about it, it's very direct and concrete, and he's very pop culture-y, but it's how can I bring this into the real world? What are the relevant applications of this? I just eat this stuff up for the theory of it. I don't really.
No, I understand where you're coming from. I was just saying I could see. Well, I don't know about how serious you would take it, but I could just see. I'm just saying I could also see NI dominance being interested in this kind of thing and actually taking it a little more seriously.
They'll probably limit their ideas on it. They'll probably like develop a guiding view when it comes to this kind of thing, and follow that through.
Right.
If you have a dominant NI user, what do you think, Ben?
I think that Shalina and us are talking about things from a slightly different point of view. I see her coming at it from the point of view of the dominant function, whereas I'm coming at it from the point of view of the whole type.
Yeah.
Right.
And NTPs are
holistically.
Yeah, if you take functions out of it and just look at them as a whole, NTPs are interested in ideas, and they're interested in ideas that get them thinking and start their own ideas. And so that's what I mean. Like I said, that gets them perked up because they're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen now. Because then they imagine other things. Now,
right. But even what I read in the examples from Young and other people, those are not the examples they give at ENTPs are very real world based. Like they don't even go into all that stuff. He uses the ENTJ as a matter of fact and the INTJs for that kind of thing. So I'm coming from other sources. Right. So that's why I have a different point of view. And I hate this crap. Like, I wish I could see eye to eye with y'all. I was just wondering, I'm not saying that ENTPs wouldn't be into it, but I'm also wondering why you would shoot. I mean,
you could just take a poll, Shalina. ENTPs tend to like Star Trek.
Right,
That's just the way
right.
it is.
No, I'm not doubting
Just
that.
life.
I could definitely see it. I'm just wondering why you automatically think. I automatically thought NI first because of the alternative reality. I didn't think NE. Oh my God, NE. But
And then
again,
I thought back to
I
trying
think I
to
was coming
watch.
from my own experience because of my own reaction. I just thought, oh, the NTPs will perk up at this.
right.
I can answer that.
I'm not
Wait,
doubting
wait,
that.
Likes to make random proclamations.
Go on, Jeff.
I was just saying you like to make random proclamations.
Yes.
So that's what that is like when one of those pops in his head, he usually says it.
Yes.
Maybe I'm being too
It was
serious about
irrational
it.
the 100 Days to Sunday, but I remember watching Wrath of Khan with an INTJ friend of mine. I was like, this is. He spent the whole time like criticizing the acting, and at the end I was like, well, did you like the movie? And he was like, yes, it was a fun movie. So I spent the whole time criticizing it. So it's not.
That's just what they're like, though. They're the critic.
It's just what they're. Yeah, exactly. So this is character in
just
action
saying
with
the other
Shalina
day,
here.
Yeah, go on, Jeff.
I was just saying the other day to my son, I was talking about the movie The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah.
And I was talking about how my father, who's an INTJ, he didn't like go see that movie in the theater or something like that. It was on television, and he had sort of stumbled across it, but very near the beginning of the movie. And my two brothers were watching it, and my father actually like stayed and watched the rest of the movie, which is rare for him to like have that situation occur. So it had to be really compelling to him. And I think what it was is, based on what he said and what I knew at the movie, is that like the military aspects of it, because it was a Tom Clancy thing, and he cares about the military stuff being very accurate as far as all of the terms being the real terms that are used and all those kind of things. Like that's one of Clancy's big things. So the fact that all that stuff was like accurate and in terminology and in use or whatever made my father interested beyond what he would just some random movie involving the military. Meanwhile, I got really bored with it because I don't care about that nearly as much. Like if the movie itself, if the story or the characters or whatever are not that interesting to me, I don't care how accurate it is. It was a larger discussion where we were talking about like realism and certain aspects of that, and I was saying, I like things, all things being equal, I would prefer realistic stuff to things that are, just Hollywood made up kind of thing. But that's not the number one thing to me, in the sense that the number one thing is whether something is entertaining or interesting to me. And so if it's not that, and actually that came up, when Ben and I reviewed Homicide, because it talked about David Simon, who wrote the original book that the show was based on, and then later joined the writing staff. And he was always pushing for more realism in the show and trying to depict stories that were very much, these are what the cops deal with on a daily basis. But Tom Fontana, the executive producer and co-creator of the show, was the one saying, okay, yeah, but this particular aspect is boring. We have to have some stuff in that makes it an interesting, thing that'll get people watching the show. You can't just have like if Simon had his way, it would there'd be entire episodes of just the cops sitting there doing paperwork at their desks. And Fontana was like, nobody wants to watch that. So there has to be some kind of balance there between the realism and the compelling drama kind of thing.
I have a
would like.
question.
Oh,
Go ahead.
you go ahead.
No, you can.
No, you do it.
I want to harken back to something Shalina said about how she focused more on the psychological aspects, because that got me thinking again about call it parallel planes or just insanity. I sort of think the episode's point would be summed up in that sentence, and that mirrors us here talking about the various things we found interesting. Our focuses were differentially on either the psychological aspect of it or the mental aspect of it, when really you're not, and this is a bit silly, you're not supposed to know. And that was sort of Serling's point in that outro, was you're wondering, is she really sick? Like, how is she Like, what's going on
Well,
here? And then,
Yeah, I mean, my first thought when Shalina said the thing about having a point is that I'm like, do they all seem like that to me?
yes, but that's the thing with the Twilight
I mean,
Zone.
or at least up for
Um,
interpretation, in that he's not. You know, we had this discussion I think last week about agendas for writers or producers and stuff, and it seemed like from everything I can gather, that Serling didn't have an agenda to convince anybody of anything. It was all just, let me tell a compelling story that's entertaining.
That pink line that Ben's highlighted with LOL written by it, and I kept staring and staring with this funny ice cold feeling that if he turns around and it's me, what will I do? Now, I don't know what Serling's type is, nor that it matters, but that is a very funny thing to think of in this circumstance, and I feel like maybe a lot of his episodes are anecdotal, where the point is to take an idea that he's had in life, because he was full of these, and then to illustrate it in a way that attempts to give the viewer the same feeling he had, that funny, icy cold feeling.
Yeah, and I
And
relate
like portray
to
that in
greatly.
another character. Yeah.
Because that's exactly what I would try to do if I had that opportunity, to have a television show or a movie or something. Would be my entire goal. If I had any agenda whatsoever other than just being entertaining, it would be to get people to feel the same way I did in some situation, in terms of expressing that feeling. And I've had people say about things I wrote, even though I've never been able to actually produce a TV show or a movie, but I've written things that people have said that the way that I wrote it was able to convey like universal human emotions about things, and that to me is like what I'm trying to do, or what I would be trying to do. So
Right. Yeah.
and that,
Ben, is this a spoiler?
Is what a spoiler?
What you just put up here.
Have you seen the?
No. This is about this episode mirror image. No, it's not.
No,
a
I know.
spoiler.
I mean the underlying point of the
It's
episode.
clear.
I mean,
Is it?
Well, that's what I put. Is it? I mean, is it clear when it says the moral, as stated in without trust or belief, there can be no survival? It didn't scream that to me.
That wasn't what I
neither.
got from it.
Me neither.
Although I suppose the trust, there was a sense of paranoia for sure, which I suppose is lack of trust. But I felt like the lack of trust was not on her end. I felt like that was more, what was his name, Paul?
Yeah,
Whoever the man was.
What it could be, it's interesting in that, imagine, because we're seeing it from her point of view, and then you can imagine being in her position, and sometimes vicariously being in a position where nobody's believing you, and you think you're losing your mind, and maybe people can connect over some things, a similar experience they've had, where it's just been a particular thing, and connecting on that aspect of her. But it never sort of went really beyond that. I was slightly disappointed by the ending. I just thought from a special effects point of view, it was quite effective, the way they did
considering the timing with the opticals.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't understand how that point, or that could be of the moral, when they don't really say anything about survival one way or the other.
I know, it's weird.
You see it in the guide here, and then you start thinking about it, and then there's multiple interpretations. But if I was asked to produce the point, as it were, of the show without seeing the guide, I would no way come up with this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it says, it stated previously in other episodes, I can probably, if I thought about it hard enough, come up with previous episodes that may have had an aspect of
Part
survival.
of the Twilight Zone is the disconnect from other people's belief.
Because they really don't. I mean, we've had, the one I mentioned before we went on the air with this one, or Ben mentioned about the astronauts, not the most recent one, but the previous one.
Yeah.
Which I've forgotten the title of, but you could say that one had aspects of trust related to survival for sure, but This one,
Yeah.
I don't really see that.
Yeah,
It's really
energy.
just more of a,
Yeah.
unless you're just going to say that, it was about trusting her own instincts. But I mean,
Mhm.
at that point, you could say, well, what if she gets on the bus anyway with the other self? What happens at that point?
Yeah.
Does she trust her own instincts to say, look, I know who I am, and this is where I'm supposed to go, as opposed to letting fear take over in that situation?
The thing I don't trust is this guide completely because it makes little mistakes
Well,
every
yeah.
now and then.
And that I wouldn't necessarily say is a mistake, as it just is an unsupported opinion.
Yeah, it's a very intuitive
Yeah.
thing, a very NFP thing to do.
Yeah.
So there's actually I'll read through this because this is actually quite interesting about what happened behind the scenes. Because some people might be watching on a mobile device. With the beginning of November 1959, production on the Twilight Zone came to a halt. 26 episodes had been produced. Now the network was going to see whether the show could attract a sizable enough audience to warrant renewing it for the remainder of the season. Serling continued his campaign to publicize the unique qualities of the show. I made no bones about taking every opportunity to blatantly plug my show, he said. Clever turns of phrase came as readily to him in conversation as they did when he was alone with his dictaphone. Reporters quoted him in hundreds of newspapers across the country. Now, other types apart from artisans can have a quick wit, but that is a thing with especially SFPs.
Well, the first thing I would say about that is that it's an amusing concept about how much has changed, and that 26 episodes, is not a complete season. Whereas now, I think, other than the few remaining daytime soaps that just keep going, don't really have seasons, there's nothing that has that many episodes in the season, much less more than that.
Yeah, I mean, the early Doctor Who's had about 35 episodes
Yeah,
as
it
well.
just shows, again, how much has changed as far as people's concepts of what constitutes a season. Now you have some shows where they do like 6 episodes and call it a season,
It better be
or-
good.
Yeah.
Because that's the excuse they use with HBO. That, say with Game of Thrones or something like that, we're only going to do 10, or with something like The Sopranos, we're only going to do 10 and make them really good.
It can be effective that way.
Yeah.
I mean, like HBO, like I haven't watched HBO in a long time, but way back when there's times in which I was like on a trip somewhere and we were in a hotel and they had it, and they'd have the little guide that, basically for most of the series, they would have one new episode a month, because it would be that same episode would be rerun like several times in the month, and then when the new month came, that was when you knew there was going to be a new episode. And so if you do it that way, then you can do 12 episodes in a year, because you do one per month, and that's a season, and that, I could see how that can work. But if you do them every week, then you run out really fast, and then you're just like waiting so much of the year for a new season to start.
I think I like what Battlestar Galactica did in their second season, where they did a block of 10 episodes, they had a break for 2 or 3 months, and then another 10 episodes. Just gives the writers a rest.
And I definitely relate to the next part also, when it says, when he says about the ratings, I don't believe them. I don't think they're statistically accurate, but boy, am I on the phone waiting to hear them. Like that completely has been the case, because back when I was watching current television, it seemed like shows I was watching were always on the verge of cancellation. They always were trying to survive. And I would say the exact same things. I don't think these ratings are accurate, because especially once I was able to go online and talk to other people who were fans of a particular show, I'd see all of this response and say, there can't be this many people that are like so much a fan of the show, and have the network be like, nobody's watching this, So I always said the ratings were not statistically accurate, and I got my proof really when it came to the way they did it, with people filling out like little books or diaries about what they watched.
Right.
Because when I finally got to do one of those, I'm like, there's no way to even know whether somebody is writing down everything they watched or how accurate they are. It's just completely self-reporting, and so you can have somebody. And so what I did with it was, I just used it to put in the things I was trying to make sure it didn't get canceled.
Right.
Whether or not I actually watched that or not for that particular time, because I'm like, well, it's not important for me to write down something that's popular because it's not going to have, it's going to survive regardless of whether I write it on there.
For some for some of the Doctor Who stories, they have this thing called the Audience Approval Index. So like to find out how not so almost like how much they like the show and various reports. It's in some of the Doctor Who books, some of the hand guides, and you can get some just every now and then just to get the audience feedback on particular stories and the depth of feedback rather than just the number of people who watched it.
Just reading ahead this next part, that's really hilarious considering what we were talking about what the point of the show was. Have this old man that would call up and demand to know what the script had been all about.
And if you'd have told him that bit about trust,
then he'd demand an explanation of the explanation.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're gone.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, when even the intuitives here find fault with something, then the sensing types are going to be even more wanting. It's almost as if they're looking at things almost more critically because they're judging it against reality.
Mm-hmm.
There's a higher bar for them, I think, the sensing types.
Well, no, I mean, yes and no, because it goes back to what I said earlier.
Entertainment.
Is that you know, at least for me, and I would think it's sort of in general with SP types, is that if it's entertaining,
right?
You know, we're willing to let things slide that, like you pointed out before, somebody like an NTJ, for instance, might like harp on something that was like scientifically inaccurate or some other thing that made them, you know, more critical. Whereas I would be like, well, if it's fun and entertaining, then I'm not really worried about that kind of. Whereas I'm more critical of things that are just like weirdness for weirdness sake, without anything actually. You know, it doesn't have to have necessarily a point, quote unquote, but it needs to have something that like holds it together rather than just being a string of randomness. Whereas I've seen a lot of N types that are like, oh, this was so deep because it had a bunch of weird stuff that just was weird, and people chanted things and bizarre stuff happened with special effects, and we went inside someone's eye, and you know, just you know, just stuff where you're like, okay, so what, you know. So I think it really depends
you could pitch that to it. You could come up, and you've probably done this before, Jeff, where you were like spoofing a plot and almost like pitching it to an intuitive, and they were like, yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Well, that's what, you know, I was saying, you know, the other day about, because I'm watching the original Twin Peaks, the first episodes. So, and I didn't watch it the first time. So if anybody's seen that, don't spoil that for me, because I'm still in like,
I'll just say, folks, sorry to interrupt you, there's a video out there of Celebok talking about why ISTPers don't like Twin Peaks, and he was saying that it's because of the NE.
That's a thing.
Well, and I didn't watch that. I didn't watch that video specifically because I didn't want to know anything about Twin Peaks that I didn't already know. Now, I didn't watch it the first time that it was on, which I was, you know, becoming a teenager at that time, because my opinion was it's just too weird. And watching it again, I agree with my 13-year-old opinion, but I'm still willing to watch it longer to give it a chance. But honestly, my overall impression is with David Lynch is that he is very much doing that weirdness just for the sake of weirdness thing. And I'm like, the thing that keeps me more interested is that there are characters that he created that are compelling enough to want to know, and sort of the way he weaves some of those characters together, that aspect of it is interesting to me. If there was a way that I could just like skip the other junk that's just sort of like, hey, you thought we were weird last week, check this out. You know, I mean, if I could take those kind of things away, you know, then it would be better. Because like I said, those aspects of it. And so, yeah, it would be real easy to parody because I could just, you know, I could take the formula which, you know, some things are like just sort of basic in that the musical cues are really predictable. They only have like the same 2 or 3 sort of musical cues, and they use them in the same way every time. And it gets stuck in my head. So if the purpose is to get the music stuck in my head, it worked. But unless they're actually trying to point to something as being a clue or whatever, you know, to like the murder mystery based on the musical cues, then it just seems a little bit annoying that they couldn't like mix it up a little more instead of using those same transitions every single time.
Now,
Anyway,
I have
I'm
a
going way
friend
off on another
who would
show.
disagree with you very much there, and I don't want to get into his obsession with Twin Peaks and everything David Lynch, in fact. If you think that's weird, you should watch some other David Lynch films. But
Oh, no, trust
the
me. I
music,
understand that he's got other stuff
my
that's
friend thinks that the
weirder.
music is absolutely critical to the plot, and I'm not sure why. He's an INFP. He's
Well,
a musician.
if you really
composes
like
the music.
music, then you are going to think it's essential.
And
to-
I think that because that's my 4D
Well, I
and
do.
I
I do
have
think
to.
music can be used very effectively, and I was talking to Morgan about that also
Yes.
recently, where I was saying that when we were sort of agreeing, I think that even hearing songs on the radio or hearing like, you know, pop music type of thing, like we'll like a song more if it seems like it sort of fits into a situation. So it could be on like a TV show or a movie, whatever, because there's something like compelling where it seems like it fits into like the canvas of something. If that's
Which is a keyword or key phrases you've been using with everything fitting together, everything being a composed piece fitting into the canvas, something you're all about. That's interesting to see because I feel like, and I think Ben would echo that, I'm like a step removed from paralleling that attitude. I'm just a little bit more up in the air and hypothetical about it. For me, it's one thing that Jeff does a lot is he will say, well, I understand that this, and this could be interpretations of it, but it's really this way. I never get to that point quite.
Did you ever see the movie Clue?
I don't think so.
I've not seen all of it.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I'm not going to spoil it, but I'm just going to say that might be the ultimate example of what you just said in terms of, because of it has multiple endings. If that, I don't think that's too big a spoiler to say that, but in terms of it basically, illustrates different ways in which the murder could have happened. And so it's like the ultimate example. And I absolutely love the end of that movie, and really the movie overall, but I love the fact that it's presented in that way. And when I was in high school, my senior year, we had an opportunity to do our own, produce our own one-act plays. And my favorite one, besides the one I wrote, was my friend Abram, who wrote this one that was a murder mystery, and it was one where the audience actually got to vote on who they thought was the killer. And the way they did it was they did all of the endings, but they counted them down basically where the last one was the real one, and based on the audience votes. So they did all the other endings, but then said, well, this was what really happened, and then did the one where they voted as being the killer. So
interesting. If you, like Ben and I, view not only the functions of types as being important, but the holistic types as being important, your liking for that play in particular is pretty explicit to type for me. You got to choose what happened, but then you had it turned around on you in an interesting way.
Yeah,
very SNI.
So I don't know how many reviews
Exactly.
you've watched, because we've done so many. We've done about 200 reviews together, Jeff and I, and so he talks about how much he loves the Choose Your Own Adventure storybooks. So
I've written a few of those. We should have We should have him
Yay.
play them.
Yeah, we could do that. We could have one of those and Jeff live, get his live reaction with you going through
That's
it.
one of my ultimate dreams, actually, is to make a movie that used that. And I even know which book I would base it on if I did. There's a book called Time Warp. And it was part of a series called Pick a Path. And that I would love to, like, if they had the technology, like in a movie theater, to put that in the movie theater and have people actually do, like, choose the path, like vote on which choice they wanted to go and go through the whole, movie that way. That would be absolutely awesome.
I've been distracted from our conversation by the optical printer on screen. Do you want to talk about that, Ben?
Just a little bit. It's just how if you there's one of these graphic there, you can see that little black outline around him. And
it looks like a poorly done Photoshop.
Yeah, because what it happens is you have to partially expose part of the film, and so you've got to mask it, and so you only expose part of the film, and then you get that image. So what you do is with an optical printer, it's like you have another bit of film and you project the lights from a camera onto it. So you got here, you got a projector, and so this is a simplified version where you project it onto another bit of film. And if you have it all set up with the masking part, where in one bit of film is, say, so in this example here, you've got part of the spaceship. Well, you need to mask that, so only that part of the spaceship goes onto the film. And then you need to mask it again so that you don't get a double exposure. And then the rest of that film gets that image projected onto it. And so you get the two combined together. And I suppose the black line is where the mask sort of meets. And these are these old composite, and they used it a lot in Star Wars. And you could only put so many elements on top of each other initially. And I listened to George Lucas talk about this, and he said that by the time they got to Return of the Jedi, they could put loads of elements on top of each other, but it became very cumbersome to like line everything up, like frame by frame. It all has to be lined up. So that's pretty much the best. It's just I just love all these old effects. Like, and they did this in the 1920s. We're not as sophisticated as this one.
It almost seems like the dude grinning as he was running was almost like the director's cue to say, "Hey, look at this cool effect I'm doing."
It is a cool effect. I think it's great.
I know. I'm saying that it's like that the director was proud of it, so he's like, get this guy to get this goofy grin on his face.
I mean, I still think it's good now by today's standards.
Oh, sure.
Now, there was a bit though. I mean, there was a slight point where it looked a little bit weird, and it looked a little bit projected. Even there was a little bit at the start there where it looked a little bit weird.
But for me, it's like that's the kind of thing where I'm never gonna like nitpick on that kind of aspect of it, because to me, if I am into the story, then to me, I think I really just sort of mentally just don't get affected by that as much. It's part of the story, and some of the old Doctor Who's we talked about, the low budget and the fact that they didn't have couldn't afford to do spiffy effects and stuff. To me, that actually is sort of part of the atmosphere of it, where it's like this universe that's been created, this is just what things look like. It's kind of my attitude toward it. It's easy for me to do the suspension of disbelief, because it's just sort of like that's how it's appearing to them, is this kind of thing, as opposed to thinking of it as, oh, the effects are so cheap, or that kind of.
This film
is like the invasion of the dinosaurs story, because it's like, well, they have these clay models and there's people that make fun of that, and I'm like, how do you know if somebody didn't have a time machine that brought dinosaurs into the modern day, that it wouldn't look like this to people? Because maybe it would.
Yeah.
If you're gonna say this fantasy that can be created, then you can't say, oh, well, this is the fantasy that's created, but then, oh, that's not a realistic depiction of the fantasy.
I mean
that, and so I point to, if anybody wants to know why I can't stand critics, I just show them the clip, because it's on YouTube, of Siskel and Ebert talking about the movie Kroll. And having them criticize the realism of a fantasy movie. That's just, to me, is like...
That's silly.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So this movie,
say,
if you want to see loads of opticals, this has got about 3,000 of them in. And it's a good film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I love that movie.
So that was
It's a little bit scary for me, but overall I like it.
So I give this one 7 out of 10. What do you give it, Amanda?
8 out of 10 because I like Jessica. Jessica Rabbit.
Oh no, I'm talking about the Twilight Zone episode.
Sometimes, Ben, you have to bring things back to where
Yes. Well, I give this one. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. Yes, that's my fault. Yes.
6.
Right. But hang on a moment. Revelatory moment here. What do you like about Jessica Rabbit?
She's so bold. I've always liked, okay, when it comes to ladies, aesthetically, I've always rather liked the bold ones, like the STP females.
Yeah,
A lot of the time are.
Love that woman. What's she called? The one who'd say, who's that? Mae West. I think you'd love Mae West and her lines. Is that a gun in your pocket, or are you just pleased to see me? So I think she may have been like ESTP, Mae West. Probably artisan. And this is nothing to do with the show, but this is just a cool effect. The foreground miniature. The way you can combine things. And they did one of those in a Monty Python film.
Which one?
Terry Gilliam. In Crusade. No, not Crusade. Holy Grail. And he said, no, it's just a miniature. You just put the foreground miniature in there.
Yeah.
But when you do things like this, you cannot move the camera. It has to be completely locked off. So then, I give it 7 out of 10. What do you give this episode of The Twilight Zone out of 10, Amanda?
6. What do you give Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
It has bonus points. I'll give that 8. Who Framed Roger Rabbit?
Right.
Jeff, what do you give this episode of The Twilight
Zone?
You know, I was just thinking about that, and I was like, you know, I've said before, 7's like my average for something that was entertaining, and I've given that to episodes that I've said, you know, were kind of a letdown and not much point, and then this one, like, seemed so much cooler, but yet I'm like about to give it a 7 because I'm like, the parts that were disappointing of it sort of drag it down slightly. So it's like, it's one of those we talked about before where you kind of average scores of different elements and make it in, because I try to do mine by like overall enjoyment. So, you know, this is another 7 because it's good, but it feels like it could be better if they just changed a few things. So that's why.
Also, to me, it was like, it was a bit repetitive.
Yes.
That's one of the things.
Yeah.
Go on, Jeff.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, just, you know, like I said, when I say change a few things, and some of that is just, you know, things like the pacing and just kind of the way that they build to a climax. And this one, you could say, doesn't really have one, because you could pick all, you know, multiple points and say, well, this could be called the climax, but then it's not really satisfying that way. So to me, you needed something bigger and better than the way they ended it. And I even suggested 2 ways they could have done that. So if I can come up with it that quickly, that seemed like with some time to write the episode,
professional writers could have done
And
that.
if the lead character were male, it would be even less noteworthy. I mean, he sort of
Yeah.
previewed it as, "Hey, I've got a script next, and it's a female in the lead." So there you go. Well, Vera Miles seems like a writer for women.
It's definitely
What-
not some sort of shining example of writing for women. And,
Yeah.
and there's an example already, because we've talked about how there's only been a couple of other female leads.
Yeah.
Well, The Hitchhiker to me was better than this.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why is the female character was more interesting, and there was more
Yes.
elements to her where you could kind of say this is what could have brought her to this point. And with this girl, he almost, in the description, it's kind of like his point from the beginning is that she's generic.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
I-
like he's defeating his own purpose. Hey, look how well I write for women. So here's this generic woman that we don't really need to know anything about beyond just that she's this typical, career woman.
I think because it was predominantly written from her perspective, they never quite pushed the hysteria far enough in what would have been seen from other people in the scene. Because I think the whole way through, like even when she's talking about the parallel world, she doesn't do a convincing job of sounding crazy in a way that would make me think this girl needs to go to a hospital. Even, I guess, for the time, I suppose.
Yeah,
I
she's
think
very
what I-
composed
yeah.
for somebody who's
Yeah.
supposedly going crazy. So
I think
I mean,
it might have been interesting to make her say you made her a battle axe, you made her a real assertive person,
mm,
but then you had an assertive person who was thinking they were losing their mind.
I
That
think
might be
that
more
she
interesting.
was too sure of herself the whole time. To have her, I mean, they tried to do this thing where she wasn't sure if she was going crazy or not, but she was so hardline trying to convince people. She said, "You'd think I was going crazy, not."
And-
This is,
And also,
Well, and that's what I meant
Yeah.
about the holes and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I start thinking of
Yeah.
things like, the guy says to her that she asked him 30 minutes ago and 15 minutes ago and asking him now. So my thought is, okay, so did the other version of her come up there twice? Or are they trying to say that she really was there previously and doesn't remember it? Or are there three
Yeah.
versions of her? Like, I mean, all these other
which
elements
should
where
have
I'm
been
like,
the
you didn't
point.
explore
All
any of that.
point, like,
Yeah.
which I think was what they were trying to go for. That kind of.
and then there was that bit. It was a bit of exposition where Robert McKee writes about this, like how writers handle exposition, where it's sort of
Mhm.
crowbarred it into her. There, you have this woman who randomly comes out with a sort of a NT explanation of parallel worlds and stuff, which was not, I mean, now everybody knows about it who watches television pretty much, but
Mm.
especially in the 1990s when science fiction series were about 5 or 10 television science fiction series on the air at the same time. Right then, so I've given it 7. Amanda's given it 6. Roger Rabbit 8. I've given Roger Rabbit 8. What have you given it, Jeff? And what have you given Roger Rabbit? Did you just say? I just got it.
7.
You gave it 7 for both. Okay then.
Yeah. No, I'm not scoring Roger Rabbit.
Okay, fair enough. Right then,
I
so
can't for various reasons.
right, okay, so
When
So-
you'd have to explain why you gave it the
Right.
rating.
so is it okay if we wind up now? Has anybody anything else to say about this episode?
Join us next time for The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Mm.
There's an old sci-fi sounding title, if nothing else, or horror,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Bye bye, folks.